Stephen, could you tell us a little bit about your history as well? Where were you born? Where were you from?
Yes,
And your family
I
heritage?
shared a little bit in my first talk. I was born in China, grew up in China, in the city of Shanghai. I came to Australia over 20 years ago as a student. Then I, of course, started to live here in Melbourne. And so I wasn't, actually I was an atheist all my life until probably just a little less than 10 years ago. When I first came to Gateway, came to the K Group, small group ministry, and became to be aware of the presence of the Holy Spirit and God and the Bible and everything. So through Bible study, I became a Seventh-day Adventist.
Wow, that's fantastic. So for all those aspiring pastors out there, here's one we prepared earlier, just 10 years in the making. It's definitely possible.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Stephen, for being with us. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Matthew, for the introduction. I'd like to welcome those of you who just joined us for the second session. I have to apologize again on the topic on the screen previously. You probably see the slides. The first talk is supposed to be the character in the Chinese characters in the Bible. Second session is the link between the Chinese history and the Bible. I did a switch around for the purpose of just give us a better understanding and lay down some foundational knowledge for us to proceed with the characters. Also, what I want to do is, I was told initially I only have half an hour for the talk, but then I was told I can an hour, if more, I can continue to do so. So, as long as I like, yes. So I just said to the gentleman, well, I will stop talking when I see more people in the audience are agreeing with me like this. So don't worry, I know when to stop and I know where to stop as well. What I want to do is go through the material. Actually, I prepared more material. I just want to share with you. There are actually a lot more material than what we can cover today in 2 sessions. Back in my own church, we've been running this program for probably over 6 to 7 years now. Some situations we can run a 2-week program just on these particular topics. That only covers a very, very small percentage or portion of the material that will be available to you if you want to look further. That teaches us these particular links between the Chinese culture and Christianity, the Bible and God. I want to start with a word on the screen. You can probably see that on the screen we have a character on the left-hand side. This character is one of the most common words in Chinese that refer to God. It does not refer to a particular God, not like the word 上帝, as I mentioned in my first talk, which is a specific term the Chinese use to refer to the God of the Creator they worship in the time of Confucius, who is an invisible, all-powerful, moral lawgiver, and the Creator God, 上帝. This word is more general. It simply refers to a deity. But the thing with the Chinese character, unlike English or most of the Western language today are alphabetical languages, the Chinese language, the characters are what we know as pictogram. In other words, each single word is made up by different components. In the most ancient form of this language, each one of these components is like a picture. That makes sense? Each one of those components is like a picture, is a drawing, actually means something. So let's use this word to start with. The word 神, okay, which is the English word is God, is made up, if you can see, 3 components here. The one on the left, there's one component here. There is one big stroke down the middle, and then there's also another component here. Can you see that on the screen? That's how the word was made up. Each one of these components actually has its own meaning. So for example, this is a very common component, or if you want to be more technical, we call it radicals. Radical means a specific component of a character that actually give us that character certain meanings. So this radical, or this component, which means to reveal or declare, specific from a spiritual sense, to reveal or declare from God. And then this is also a component. In the character, it means a man, a person, somebody, a person. And then this character, or this component means a field or a garden, a place. Now, you may ask the question, why would the word or the character God is made up from revelation, a man, and a garden? Let's do one exercise first. How many of you, put your hand up if you're a Christian, you're a Bible-believing Christian, put your hand up. Okay, that is, wow, most of you. Okay, now put your hand up if you are currently not a Bible-believing Christian. That's also okay, put your hand up if you're not a Bible-believing Christian. If you are not a Christian, put your hand up. No? Okay. I want you to do an exercise, okay? Because most of you, I'm speaking to the converted, okay? Because most of you are Christians, what I want you to do now is to, when you're going through for the next maybe 40 or 45 minutes, I know it's not going to be easy, but just go with me here. Let's try not to pretend, but let's try to think from somebody who does not have any biblical knowledge. Okay? Let's try that. Let's try to think from a perspective that somebody who do not know God, do not know about the Bible or Jesus Christ for that matter, somebody who have no knowledge about the gospel stories, especially the Genesis stories, right? And try to think from that perspective. Those people, let's just say, because the point I'm trying to make here is this. For those of you, this is just a refresh from the previous session, and for those of you who were not here for the first session. As a Chinese, myself, who grew up and was educated in China, we were taught, right, Christianity and the Bible is for the Western people. Nothing to do, no relevance to the Chinese. That's what we were taught in mainland China, okay? I want to debunk that in the sense that, let's assume that is the case. My question now will become, if that is the case, then I want to understand some of the Chinese characters, not just some, sporadic characters, but specific characters that's to do with spirituality in our Chinese own culture and our language. I want to understand why does these words were made up in such a way that trying to tell us some sort of a story or some sort of narrative which we cannot find anywhere else but in the Bible. Let me repeat the point I'm trying to make here. My point is, I want to understand why would the Chinese language, especially the characters that's so central to the spiritual component of the language, are made up in such a way that they try to communicate some sort of message or story that cannot be found in any other narratives in our own Chinese culture and the history, right? The only place you can find those narratives and the story that can fit all these words is in the Bible. I want to utilize these characters now. I'll go through each one of the characters. We can do this for the next 5, 6, 7 hours, okay? Because I don't want to see each one of you, agree with me more than you should. I'll just pick some of the most commonly known, or some of the most famous, so-called famous cases, right, today. And if you want more characters, you want more reference, more information about these ideas and topics, come and see me afterwards. Let's start with the very first one, the word God. A Revelation, a field in the garden. I don't have to go through all this because most of you are Christians. You know exactly from the book of Genesis how the story tells us. When the Bible starts to introduce God and his creation work, when it talks about the creation of man, that after he created Adam, he put him in the garden. Now, in the Chinese culture, it's very interesting that the Chinese, our own ancient writings, also collaborate with this particular teaching. I want to make a very quick point. There are several ways the Chinese trying to explain where human being came from. Okay? There are 3 major schools of thought, so to speak, right now. The first school of thought It's basically saying that we came from monkeys, human beings, and the monkey came from some lower tier animals, so on and so forth. This is the common theory of evolution. Most Chinese actually believe that. And there's also people who believe that for those who are Buddhists in China, they believe that the Buddhist teaching of the origin of the human being, which has come from this idea of reincarnation. But that itself is very interesting. It does not actually really explain to us exactly where does the first human being or the first being come from as well, from the idea. Then there's also a very small percentage or small portion of the Chinese who actually read our own Chinese writings from the ancient times seem to suggest we are created by a heavenly God. One of the things we can see that is from this character here, the very word of creation, or to create, to not just to build or make something from existing material or something, but to create something from nothing, so to speak. That is the word create. Is made up from two major radicals or two major parts. The first part is to walk, to move forward. And the other one is to talk or to communicate. And then you can further break down this word to talk, to communicate into three parts: living, dust, and a man, which identified by an open mouth. That has dual meanings. It can sometimes mean a mouth, right? The mouth, or it can also mean a person, a man. Then again, a creation, we know the story. God created everything by speaking, but when it comes to man, he created a being, not a baby, right? I had a 1-year-old recently. The 1-year-old right now is at a stage where it's still crawling, but it's very close to start walking. But God did not create a toddler or a baby, right? God created man, a fully grown man who was able to have conscience, was able to have moral, understanding, and to make sound judgment and decisions. And through that, the process, a living being that was created by God, and God communicated that as well. We know the story from the Genesis. Adam was very happy in the garden. The word garden, again here, this is the official word for garden, right? It's made up from dust, breath, or mouth. There's a bigger one. The bigger square actually means an enclosure. Right, an enclosure. A person, then there's another person. So you can say there are two people in this big enclosure. There's a lot of dust in them. Again, where do you see that story? Again, flesh. Two people. There's a border. There's one person plus a border. Then you have another person. How does that make sense? How does it make flesh? Think about it. How was Eve created according to the Bible? Right, this is also a very interesting word here. The word means perfect or benevolence, right? Perfect, benevolence. You see, you have this radical here represents person or people, and this is simply a character or word for two. How come two people makes it perfect? Where can you see that? Isn't one is perfect? No, not enough? What did God say? Adam and Eve, who were created perfect. At the very beginning, they were created perfect. Okay, the word for forbidden. Interesting. These two radicals, you can see that you can further break them down, which means trees, or true trees. And this one, again, to command or to review. Remember I mentioned that before, the word character for God. Revelation, to review, or to declare, to command. So the word for forbidden have the component of true trees, or a forest. How does that relate to the story of Genesis? What did God say to Adam after he created this perfect environment for him to live in? He says you can pretty much do whatever you want, eat any fruits in this garden except for this one tree. Right? This one tree. You cannot eat the fruits of that tree. That's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But that's just one tree. What about the other one? Think about it. What's the name of the other tree that also mentioned in the account of Genesis? That's the tree of life. So that command, that forbidden command, has the two components. Freedom of choice. You can choose to continue to live forever by partaking in the fruits from the tree of life, or you can choose to eat the fruits of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but then you will lose the right or lose the access to the tree of life. Very interesting. That's not the only one. I'll skip to this one. The word for desire or covetousness, right? Is this one. Lan. Again, you see the two trees. I don't like to use the word teasing, but I always ask this question in my class, especially I'm teaching the people come to church or come to our care group for the very first time. I ask them, if the Bible is purely a Western book, explain to me why in the Chinese word desire is made up from two trees plus a woman. Is it just human nature at play? What's wrong with, do you know what I mean? Is it because the Chinese culture is so patriarchal? No, because you know why? For a very long time, in those early days even, there's a lot more historical evidence to suggest that the Chinese society was, for a very long time, especially in the early stage, was matriarchal. So how do you explain the character here, especially the word for desire, as a woman instead of man? A lot of words, bad words, actually have the radical of man in them, but not in this one. Interesting. Come back to this one. This is also a very interesting word. It means to execute, to put something to death, or someone to death in Chinese. The word is 诛, made up from a character called here. Is the radical here means words. So words plus the tree plus life plus dust. What was the first, I guess, death sentence that passed down from God? That's right. What did God say? Now you're gonna die, unfortunately, because you have made that choice. Because you have eat from the tree, right? You shouldn't touch. Then you're going to lose your life by what? Returning to dust. Interesting. This is one of my favorite words. I want to quickly explain to you something. For those of you, I'm sure, okay, how many of you have friends who are Chinese? Put your hand up. You have friends, a neighbor, someone you know. You come in regular contact with are Chinese. Okay. I want to, before I go any further, I want to explain something to you real quick, for those of you who don't familiar with this idea. In 1949, there was a big change in China. Not just a change of government, but also a change of ideology. One of the things that happened after 1949 was the government introduced the idea of changing the Chinese characters. How did they do that? They called it the simplification of Chinese characters. I'll give you an example. What you see on the screen, all the example I've used, I purposely have chosen all the words in its original form. These are what we call today the traditional Chinese. Anybody here that grew up in, say, Hong Kong or Taiwan or Malaysia? Anyone here? That you grew up in the non-Chinese? Some of you? Yeah? So what language do you learn to write, for example? Is it traditional Chinese or simplified Chinese? Yes? Yeah, traditional Chinese. Very good. The trouble with traditional Chinese is very complicated. It takes ages for you to write something. I grew up learning the simplified version of the Chinese. I have to say, it makes life a lot more easier. Why? Because it's just simpler to write. But you see, there's also a problem that comes from the simplification of Chinese characters or language. You know what that is? the meaning is lost. That's right. Because when you simplify the Chinese, what you're actually doing is you change the picture. What did I say? You have changed the picture of the character or the language who was supposed to, guess what? Communicate a message to the people who are writing them and reading them. Let me repeat that one more time. The primary purpose of the language, if you some of you study linguistics, one of the primary purpose of the language is to preserve knowledge and to communicate a certain message or certain idea to the future generations. But by simplifying the characters, I can say, okay, maybe they did it for the better purpose of trying to, make it easier for more people to receive education, to make it easier for people to learn to write, that's fine. But the problem, the byproduct of that process is a lot of people grow up in China today, they have lost the idea, or lost touch with what these words were supposed to mean originally. Primary example is this. This is a character that means righteousness. Righteousness. It's quite complicated to write. You can see that. I'm sorry, I did not have the simplified version on there, but the simplified version only has 3 strokes. One dot, one sort of squiggle stroke, and the other one. 3 strokes, that's it. That's one word for righteousness. But the original word, look at this, complicated. Why? Because it's made up by 2 major components. One simply means sheep. The other one means me. So let me ask you, why sheep and meat makes it righteous? You have to answer straight away because you know the Bible. Praise God for that. Now imagine for 1 second you are somebody who never read any story in Genesis. You have no knowledge about the sacrificial system of the Jewish time in the sanctuary service system. You do not know the type and the antitype of the sacrificial sacrifice on the cross of Jesus Christ. You don't know any of that. Let's imagine for 1 second. You don't know any of that. And you come across a character like this. You have a friend who's Chinese. You put this word up, and you ask them what this word is, they will tell you, and then you ask them the second question. Why is a sheep and meat makes it righteous? There is no coherent or reasonable explanation can be given in any Chinese historical or literal writings that can tell you why. The only place you can find is the Bible. Jesus. And you can further, if you really want to go deeper, the word me, you can even divide that into hand and a knife. Think about it. The first thing that God wants Adam to do after he committed sin is to what? God has given him an apron to cover himself. In order to do so, God has to kill an animal. That's the beginning of the sacrificial system. From that point, killing the animal, and later on it's very clear it's a sheep, right? It is a necessary step for one to remove one's sin. This is the word that we use on the screen in the brochure, right? Some of you may have seen it, and a lot of you know about that. The word means a big sheep, a big vessel, right? It's made up by these 3 components. A little or a smaller vessel called Zhou, 8 people. I was just talking to Randy, was it? Just before, his friend last night, he showed his friend, the Chinese friend, this character and asked him the question, why 8 people in the boat make it a bigger boat? We want a bigger boat. Why? Because we've got 8 people inside. Most ship can take, 80, 800 even, right? A super cruiser these days can take what? How many people can, Queen Elizabeth II, that big cruiser ship take? I don't know. A few hundred, thousands, right? 8 people in a ship, why does it make a bigger boat? Why? Well, the only place you can find that is in the Bible again. Who's in the ark? You have Noah, Noah's wife, right? That's 2. Who else? The 3 sons of Noah, is that it? And the wives of those 3 sons. So how many people you have in the ark? How many human beings? You have 8 human beings in the ark, right? Don't believe the Hollywood adaptation, that's incorrect. Okay? Only 8 people in the ark, right? That's it. And what happens after the ark? What story comes after the ark? Well, we know in Genesis 11, verse 1, 4, and 8, 9, the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth came out of the ark, and what did they do? They decided to build a tower, right? The Tower of Babel. Now, interestingly, the Chinese word for tower is ta. Again, let's break it up. Dust or earth, grass, people, one, mouth. You know what it's saying? It's describing the process of how people were trying to build the Tower of Babel, the material they used. Historians, archaeologists now claim they find the original site of the Tower of Babel. But in those days, even with what they can see, you have to use material that's available to you at the time. Earth or clay is one of the most common material, but also grass or vegetations or anything that we utilize to also make the material stronger or also employ. Then you have people. And why one mouth? Because when they were building the ark, they were not speaking Cantonese or Mandarin or English or French or Spanish. They were speaking only one language. We don't know what the language is, right? But the Bible says they were speaking one language. And that was the story, the Tower of Babel. But then what happened? God did what? What did God do? Right? He caused the confusion. God caused the confusion, right? He caused the confusion of the people. So the word confused or confusion in Chinese, notice, tongue and mystery. How do you explain that? Confusion comes from the tongue or the words coming out of the mouth becomes like a mystery. If I start speaking Shanghainese right now to you, most of you will not understand. Actually, who can speak Shanghainese here? Shanghainese, okay, maybe just one person. Apart from the lady over there, nobody can understand me. It will be just voices, right? Confusion. And then what happens after God confused the language of the people? What's the purpose of confuse the people's language? Why? So they cannot continue building this tower that does not give glory to God, right? And they want to build this tower to give themselves glory. Not only that, God wanted them to disperse, no longer congregate in that one place, right? God wanted them to be scattered. The Bible said they are scattered, right, all over the place. Now, scattering, again, Chinese, the top part means together, all together. The second part is flesh, right? And the one on the right means go. So it's basically saying everyone was in one place, right? But then they start to go everywhere, scattering. Now it's very interesting. This is one of the key words, right? I want you to pay very close attention to this character. This will be one of the top 3 words I will use if I'm conversing to somebody who is familiar with Chinese culture, right? These are the top 3 words. Definitely I will use this one. The word for migrate means people transfer or they move from one place to another. The word for migrate is like this. This is the traditional. By the way, again, these are the traditional characters. Don't use the simplified version. It doesn't make sense. Use the traditional version, okay? This is traditional. That is how the Chinese was written thousands of years ago. To migrate, you break it down. Big, to walk or to travel. West, stop. Why west? People can say, oh, that means you can travel from the west or you can travel to the west, correct? You look at the map of China. For those of you who know a little bit about the Chinese geography, what's east of China? It's the ocean, right? So What about after that? There's Japan. So you're telling me migrating, again, if it's relating to the Chinese culture, migrating, is it likely that it means to travel from the east to the west? Because from the east, there's ocean. And after there's Japan. And modern historians and scholars all believe the Japanese, the indigenous population, actually came from the west, not the other way around. It's not like Japanese moved to China and became the Chinese. It's the other way around. So the only reasonable explanation is the word migrating is talking about a migration from the west to the east. So why west? Again, the word west can be broken down into one, a person in the enclosure. So again, this is give you a clue about what West was referring to. It's not just Wild Wild West in America, right? It's not just Western Europe. Again, the word West, even in the Chinese language, seems to link that with the Genesis story, Adam and the Garden of Eden. Now, I want to take this opportunity to pause and just think about this, right? Somebody made a very good observation, but I want to make this point one more time. I don't know what happened to the screen. What happened to my top bit? Okay. Sorry, technical issue. Should be fixing 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.8, 0.7. Okay, how did the Chinese know all the stories? Thank you, Randy. You're a lifesaver. How did Chinese know all the stories? How did they know? They don't have the Bible, right? They don't have the Bible you have in front of you. You don't have the Torah, the first book, 5 books of the Moses. You don't have Moses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How do they know? Right? Yeah. Pastor, what's the name again? Kevin? Yeah. Pastor Kevin mentioned that oral tradition. Remember that? Oral tradition. Some things that's been passed down from generation to generation orally. Okay, that is what we know today, but I want to show you this word. This is the word for to speak or to tell, one of the most common words in Chinese. Yeah? So you want to say to speak or to say something. To say is this word here. It's word again made up from 3 components. This component means the language, the written language, or language in general. Language or words. This component is 8. And then you have, very interestingly, this component here, it normally means elder brother, but it can also mean, in some cultural context, elders. Elders. So for example, give an example. In the Chinese culture, the eldest son will resume or will take up the position as the patriarch of the family as soon as the father of the family passed away. The eldest brother will take up to that. And also, once somebody who become someone who's quite respected in a particular community in the Chinese culture, that person will be addressed as elder brother, although that person may not have any biological connection with anyone else in that particular community. But then once somebody becomes a respected person, that person will be addressed as older brother, or this word here. Therefore, the idea of eldership, or someone who is the elder of the community, means someone who is respected, and someone who is someone who has authority of the community. This word can also mean that. So let me go back to this point here. Let's break up this character one more time. The word for speak is words or language plus 8 plus elders. Think about that for 1 second. This is something you have to think about. Again, why 8? Where do we see in the past or in the just moments ago? Which word has that component 8 in it? The word for ship, a big ship, right? Why 8? Because in the big ship, there are 8 people. And this is talking about the story of Noah's Ark. Yes? Are we tracking? Yeah? We're tracking? Yeah? Okay, now, tell me, is it possible the word for speak, orally communicate, in other words, to orally communicate means that to take down words, take the language coming down from 8 elders. So who are the 8 elders in this case? Is it possible the 8 people that came out of the ark, Chinese, the ancient Chinese somehow consider them as the 8 elders of their own language and culture? Is it possible? If the biblical account is correct, we can say that 8 people that came out of the ark, they are considered the 8 elders of the human race today, right? These are the surviving members of a human civilization that simply got completely destroyed by the flood, correct? So in the new beginning of the new historical narrative, these 8 people, their knowledge, their sayings, their ideas becomes what? Considered as the 8 elders or the culture's origin. One more character here. The word for passing down or to hand down. Water, 8 people. The word for passing down, to follow the certain path, or you can even go so far to suggest tradition, right? Water, 8 people. So you can see the coding. It's like every character is trying to tell you something. There are messages hidden in them. You just have to break them apart and just stand back and go, that's interesting. I never thought about that. The beauty of the Chinese characters, especially the traditional Chinese characters, is that these are pictograms. Every character is like a picture, or a picture made up from several smaller pictures, or trying to tell you something. So this picture tells you there's water there. This picture tells you that there's people. This picture tells you the number of these people are 8, right? So a lot of water, 8 people. What's it trying to say? Noah's Ark. This is one of the illustrations I can find on the internet. After the dispersion, right? After the ark, the 3 sons of Noah, they went to different places. In Chinese culture, if the biblical account of the history and the chronology is correct, we have the Tower of Babel, which happened around 2400 BC, and the first dynasty of China established about 2005 BC. So there's a gap about 400 years, right? 400 years from here to here. Geologically, the Noah's Ark, the Bible records, is stopped at the end. Today's Turkey, right? The Mount Ararat, right? It stopped right there. This is 2800 BC, 2500 BC, there is the Tower of Babel. South of that, this is today's Iraq. Again, a few hundred years later, you have the first recorded history, the first recorded record of the Chinese dynasty that's forming over there. Can you see? There seems to be a migrating pattern here. Again, to conclude, at the previous session, and also just recap as well. In the first session, there are 3 things I want to debunk. Okay, these are the things that are commonly taught in China, even today, that we were led to believe if you are educated over there. When it comes to religion, especially Christianity, this is what we are told or we are taught. The Bible is a Western religious book, number 1. Number 2, since the Bible only mentions the Greeks, the Hebrews, people of maybe the Northern Africans or whatnot, but never mentions the China or the Chinese people. Therefore, it's irrelevant to us. It's just a cultural book that's worth reading. It's like Shakespeare. Confucius, which is considered the cultural patriarch or the forefather of Chinese culture, and our own ancestors, we have our own belief system We do not need to know about, we are not necessarily entitled or we should know about, Western religions because we've got our own thing, right? In the previous session, we have seen that, number one, Confucius and our ancestors, Chinese ancestors, also believing in the God of the Bible. We also see that the Bible does mention China, Chinese as well. There's other references in the Bible that kind of refer to in the end time, the God's kingdom, people of all nations will be part of it as well. And finally, from what we have seen so far, right, we can say that the Bible is not a Western religious book. Because think about the history of the Bible. The oldest book we can find in China is only written about 600 or 700 years BC, whereas the book of Genesis, especially the first 5 books of the Bible, were written much older than that, right? Some historians put it somewhere between 1300 to 1500 years BC. So which one's older? The Genesis accounts, yeah? So the Chinese writings and our own characters were formed after that. So therefore, it's not about so when people keep on asking me the same question, I just want to give you a pointer. You have Chinese friends, they will ask you the same question, definitely. How come the Bible never talks about China? Think about this. Let's turn the table. Why should the Bible talk about China? Bible was written first. Chinese culture and the language comes after that. So the right question is, can we find in the Chinese books, in the Chinese ancient writings, in the Chinese language that talks about the Bible? You get me? Some of you, you're not listening. Okay, let me try that again. This will be an aha moment, okay? I don't get an aha response, therefore, let me try that again. People keep on asking, why should I come to your Kegel or your church and to learn about the Bible since it never talks about my own culture and my own whatever, right? You say to them, which one comes first, the Bible or the Chinese writings and the Chinese language? The Bible comes first, yeah? The Bible was written first, yes? Okay, if the Bible was written first, why should the Bible talk about China? Which it did, anyway, but why should it? The right question should be, what about the Chinese languages and the Chinese ancient writings? Do they talk about the Bible? And I believe so. I believe the origin of the Chinese culture and its history originates from the biblical accounts. Because, after all, we are all created by the same God.
Amen.
So, once again, whose narrative was right? I gave my interpretation, my understanding. This is my narrative. A lot of Christians also believe that. Again, but you will come across so many people that were taught a completely different narrative. Whose narrative is right? You decide. Right? We have to give people the opportunity to learn, then they can have the right choice. Okay. Time to ask any questions? Anyone have any questions? I want to open the floor now for the audience. First come, first serve. Of course, I see the hand go up straight away there, the lady there. Yes.
It's not really a question, but well, it is. The Chinese actually think that the number 8 is a lucky number. Would that be coming from that as well? The 8 vote?
Very good question. Okay. The lady was asking a question that the Chinese recognize, at least a lot of Chinese today, see the number 8 as a lucky number. Is there any historical context or reference that can link that with anything that we talked about today? Is that the question? Yeah? Okay. No. That's a simple answer. For me, it's just a coincidence. You know why? Because the reason why they see that as a lucky number is not so because the word is, the language or the character itself bears any resemblance or have any intricate meaning itself, right? But simply because the phonetic of the word, in other words, the pronunciation of the word 8 sounds very, very close to the word fa, which means to make a lot of money in Chinese. That is the reason. That is also the reason why it wasn't considered a lucky number until recently, in recent years, when China becomes such an economic powerhouse. If that answers the question, yes. Yes, okay.
I was just wondering, when you're breaking down those traditional characters into the other elements, is that set in concrete or is it open to interpretation the way they're actually broken down?
Yep, very good question. It's an interesting question, can be answered by way of etymology. Etymology, which is a subject or basically the theory of developing, try to explain the origin of the word. Where does the word come from or came about? So to answer your question in a simple way, it is open for interpretation. So people can try to break apart a particular character in a certain way. That is fine. But the examples I use today, the characters, there are actually thousands of characters you can break apart, and you can also find links with the Bible. But the ones I use today, these are the most common interpretation that's available for these characters. But the problem is, without the biblical account or biblical story, people are struggling to come up with a reasonable narrative or explanation why these characters are formed in such a way. That is the point. Yep. Okay. Yes, gentleman in the back.
My question is about the name of the Sabbath, the word Sabbath. All around the world, except Southeast Asia, China, Korea, Vietnam, Japan, it's not a Sabbath. Like in all other languages, Shabbat, Sabbath, Sabbato, Sabbata, they're all similar, except Southeast Asia. Can you explain why, if the Bible went that side of Southeast Asia and they don't use the name Sabbath, it's completely different?
Sure, thank you. Okay, that's a very good question. Actually, people ask me the question as well. You see, for me, I see that there is a difference between direct revelation and indirect revelation. Let me explain to you. Not every single cultural group, as far as we know, observes the seventh day of the week as the Sabbath, correct? Not every single one. So that tells me that there's a reason why God has chosen one particular people group to give them the specific moral codes which contains the Sabbath, the Ten Commandments was in there. Whereas for Chinese, it's very interesting. The 7-day cycle was formally introduced by the Jesuit priest to China during the Ming Dynasty in the 1600s. Sorry, 1500s, 16th century, okay? By the Jesuit priests to China. Earlier, even in the 15th century, there's people, also earlier Jesuit pioneers trying to do that. It was formally introduced in the Ming Dynasty to China. Before that, the Chinese we do not have a formalized 7-day cycle, because we only have the lunar calendar, which observes the monthly cycle of 30 days a month. However, in one of the oldest books that can be found, or people tend to believe today, historians and scholars believe today, which is the Book of Change, right, in China, right? One of the oldest books in China is called the Book of Change. In that book, it does mention that 7 days is a cycle. Let me repeat that. In the oldest book that can be found today in China, called the Book of Change, people believe was written probably a few hundred years before the time of Confucius. It's kind of debatable, but let's say it's around about 700 to 800 BC. That was when that book was written. In that book, it talks about 7日往复. In other words, 7 days is a cycle, but it was not observed by the people. And for me, at this point of my research and my understanding is the observance of the Sabbath was not something that was directly revealed to people groups outside of the Hebrews, the ancient Israelites. Therefore, it's not strictly observed by any other nations formally, right? Whereas the prominent form of worship, the pagan worship, when it comes in, sun worship is more prevalent. happens in Chinese culture as well, some sun worship. Right? But it happened much later. In the earlier times, sun worship was not a common practice. It was only introduced later on. I'm not sure if that answers the question. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Yes.
So you just noticed, like, when you break down a character,
Mm.
and for example, say boat or ship, with the A, it looks a bit different in the main character.
Oh, you mean like this, for example?
Yeah, like C8 looks a bit different.
Yep. Okay. Let me.
My glasses are wrong.
Yeah. no, your glasses are right.
I noticed it too, even in the word sheep, the line kept on going down. I was just wondering why it sort of looks a bit different sometimes.
Yes. So okay, it's a very good question because it's simply because there's an idea of abbreviation of the components. Let me give you a quick example. Let's say. Sorry, I have to go through that. That's for those of you who missed out, you really missed out. So, anyway, where is it? Righteousness. Okay, here we go. All right, you look at this part, right, at the top. Okay, this bit here. It doesn't have that line go all the way down, right? That's what you're talking about, yeah? Okay. The reason for that is technically that's not a character, but it's an abbreviation or a formalization of the character, what that means. So this bit, they call it the radical of sheep. The radical, that's what's the technical name for that part. It's called the radical of sheep. So in Chinese, 阳字部, which means the radical that represents sheep. So for Chinese, they understood. Okay? That original word is sheep. That's why that's the character itself, but that is the representation of sheep in another character. That makes sense? Yeah. Any other question? I saw no more hands before. Maybe they all been answered. Yeah. Sorry.
How fast Seventh-day Adventists is growing in China? What disadvantages they have?
The problem is I can't give you an exact number because there is none. They're just guesstimates. China is very much closed when it comes to church development. So I can't give you an exact number. I know that it's growing very fast. What I can tell you is that Christianity in general. Christianity in general is the fastest growing religion in China right now. There's no doubt about it. Actually, the biggest Bible printing company in the world is in China. It's in Nanjing, the city of Nanjing. Prints about, I think, an astronomical number of copies of Bibles a year, like millions of copies of Bible a year. Biggest, largest Bible factories is in China.
But they print for us, not for themselves.
Also for us as well, because they print for everybody. They don't belong to any denomination, the company. So we use the company as well, I believe, our church. I can say that the advantage of the Seventh-day Adventist, let me give you an idea. Doug Batchelor, just over 2 years ago, was in China to have, he organized and he was preaching a 2-week evangelistic meeting. Now that was the first time ever a foreign missionary or foreign pastor or foreign religious person that was able to do that in China since 1949, of any denomination. The reason why he was able to do that, one of the key reasons, is because we have a ministry in China that actually translated Amazing Facts DVDs into Chinese. And not just that, they voiced up, they employed people to voice dub the DVD. So when Doug Batchelor was speaking, he was speaking perfect Chinese, even with his mouth movement, everything. And that DVD becomes so popular, it was widely not just given to our church members, it was actually given to a lot of the Sunday church people, that what becomes the most sought after Bible DVDs of the Chinese Christian churches in China. And because it became so famous, this Pastor Doug, the Dao Ge, Pastor Doug became so famous in China, the city that he went to, all the Sunday church leaders come together, and plus our people want to get him to come to preach in China. So what's the advantage? The advantage I see is that we have the truth.
Amen.
The sad part is a lot of our members don't see it. And that's what I see our advantage.
I just asked, are they printing in Chinese the King James version?
Can you repeat it, please, Stephen?
She was asking, are we in China? Are they printing the Chinese King James version? Okay. The Chinese translation, the most common translation of the Chinese Bible, it does not come from the King James. It was translated from the Latin Vulgate. Yeah. So it's not an English translation. They did not use King James as the origin for translation. The most common Chinese version is called the Chinese Union Version of the Bible. It was translated from the Latin Vulgate and Septuagint, I believe.
Going back to the Chinese characters, I saw a few. Can some of these other characters, even though you've broken them down, be broken down further? So I saw where there was a word for elder, and it looked like it had.
This one?
Yeah. and
Yep.
Forgive me, my Chinese is a bit rusty, but that looks like mystery, the word that showed up in one of the other characters. That,
Sure.
Yeah.
If you want to, you can further break it down.
Further.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
You can further break down, but the point is this, okay? I'm not saying, I'm trying to communicate this as clearly as I can. You can always break it down to the point where you cannot break it down. But you have to ask yourself the question, does that tell you a story? That's my point. Because the Chinese language, the uniqueness about the Chinese language is because it's a pictogram, it is always designed to tell a story. Let me repeat that one more time. The uniqueness about the Chinese language, one of the, I think it's the still only remaining language in the world that is remain as a pictogram, right? The language is designed to tell a story. So it's not because I'm a Christian, I'm trying to, dissect the characters in such a way to fit my paradigm, to fit my understanding of the story. But I'm just trying to break it down as much as I can in a way that, does that tell a story? Is that trying to communicate something? Anything? What I can see, this is not one incident. If it's just one character tells a story, that's fine. But I just used how many characters already? And you know what? That's only we're only scratching the surface. That's only a small portion of the characters that's out there. Like I said, I have more material here. I can go another 4 or 5 hours without stopping, go through all these characters. You can see that over and over and over, these characters all seem to be telling the same story. Cannot be found anywhere else. The point is this: you cannot find the narrative in the Chinese own culture or historical interpretations, unless you use the Bible. That goes first.
The Japanese kanji, is it based on the simplified or on the traditional?
Traditional.
Traditional. So it would apply to the
Yes.
Japanese language.
The challenge with Japanese, be careful though, the Japanese kanjis, because they borrow, I don't want to use, they borrow from Chinese, some of the kanjis actually change the meaning. If you know what I mean. So you have to be a bit careful. So when you talk to someone who's Japanese, you have to be aware of that. Some of the kanji may mean the same thing in its original version, but some may differ because it was borrowed language. Yeah. Yes.
I'm just wondering if some of the characters, when you break it down, whether they actually tell a story from another religion, sort of like pagan-based stories as well, like
Sure.
mythologies.
Yeah. From my research so far, I can't see any. The traditional Chinese interpretation, though, they are trying to say something like that, but these are just mythologies in the sense that, okay, let me, I'm trying to explain this. The Chinese mythology is very interesting. The Chinese mythology is It's not like the Greek or the Romans, right? They have a more formalized way of narrative whereby the stories are told consistently. So, for example, I don't know, I want to use the pagan stories here. Hercules, for example, is the son of Zeus, right? So that's a story that kind of well known within the Greek mythological confine. You can find that passed down to the Roman. The Roman mythology is pretty much the same thing. Whereas the Chinese mythology is actually a bit of a mixed bag. I wouldn't say self-contradicting, but it's a bit more confusing. So that is the reason why when in the Chinese traditional writings, when they have written books in the past which explain where these words came about and why they're formed in such a way, the narrative was not coherent. In other words, they are not trying to tell the same story. It was just one story there, but they don't sort of correspond. Because you can say that the interpretation is also self-contradicting as well. Because you can't say this bit here means this story, but that bit there means a totally different story altogether if it's used in the same word. You know what I mean? So I don't see a consistent interpretation if it's used to try to explain it from a different theological, a different mythical point of view. I don't see that at this point in time. The only point I can see over and over and consistently corresponding is the biblical account. That's the only one I can see. Yeah. Yes, the lady there.
Is the Dark Bachelor video or DVD available? Yeah.
I'm not sure. Maybe you can go to www.amazingfacts.com. I'm not sure. I think they have a Chinese version of Amazing Facts on the website. So, yeah. I'm not sure if the whole DVD is available there. They should be, so maybe you should contact Amazing Facts directly. I'm not here to endorse Dark Bachelor in any way. So, yeah, I see the gentleman raise a hand. I'll go to the one in the back.
You know, like in the English language, we got 26 letters.
Yep.
You know, A, B, C, D, E, like, you know, but in Chinese you don't have letters, right? You got these characters.
Yep.
Do you have like a standard amount of characters, like, so that you have to learn, so that like when I open a Chinese book with that knowledge, I can work out what's being said, you know, because there's like millions of words in this world.
Sure. Okay, Chinese language 101.
Stephen, did you restate what you asked?
Oh, he was just asking how many Chinese characters I need to learn before I can understand something, communicate?
If I open a Chinese novel or something.
Yeah, to read. Okay, yeah. 300 to 500 words you need to learn before you can basically communicate with a Chinese person. 300 to 500 words. Up to 2,000.
That's not the alphabet, is it?
That's just words. I'm talking about characters. There's no alphabet. Yeah. So just different characters you need to learn in order to be able to communicate with somebody. 300 to 500 characters. Okay. Goes to about. You're talking about a novel. You're looking at about 3,000 characters you need to learn before you can read a novel. In order to write a novel, you need 6,000. But that's why Chinese, most of Chinese say wearing glasses.
I think it's very obvious how much people have enjoyed. Where is the, here it is, Never Far Away. Can I have one of those? And I thought I'll give the man a break. You have questions. You're good. Stephen, that was just absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
That was excellent. That was so well received. It was a blessing. It's to see another angle of the gospel. I think it's a tremendous affirmation, and it should encourage each and every person here that has attended here today. And we want to commend you and thank you for coming here. And maybe we'll have just a prayer as well.
Sure.
We pray for the blessing, and we pray for the blessing on the food as well, because we have all this Chinese talk makes me want to eat Chinese. Sorry about that, but that's yes. Okay, let's bow our heads.
Heavenly Father, we thank you that you have been so generous with us today. We've learned so much, so many interesting things, and we thank you for Pastor Stephen Liu as he comes here from Melbourne and he has shared his knowledge and insight, and what a smorgasbord indeed it was. We thank you for everything that you've given us today, for your very presence here. And Lord, we ask that you continue to bless us also as we will part from this room and as we will partake of the food and partake of the fellowship, Lord, that it may be blessed. Bless each and every person here, that we may continue to search, never giving up, because you're a wonderful God who's never given up on us. Bless us now in Jesus' precious, precious name. Amen.
Amen.